Elena Rivera moved silently across the polished marble floors of the Blackwood Estate's grand ballroom. The vast space, ornate with gold-laced pillars and frescoed ceilings, often intimidated the rest of the staff. But for her, it was a sanctuary. She had finished her nightly chores, dusting the chandeliers, arranging the fresh flowers in the foyer, and making sure every rug was perfectly straight. Now, the night belonged to her and her secret passion. She pulled a small phone from her apron pocket and pressed play. A soft violin melody floated through the room. Under the moonlight streaming in from the tall windows, Elena closed her eyes and began to dance. Her body moved with unspoken elegance, each step drawing her deeper into a world that was hers alone. This was her life's biggest secret. She had grown up in a modest neighborhood, dreaming of ballet classes she could never afford. Despite her circumstances, she had taught herself through online tutorials and sheer determination. Every swirl of her skirt, every graceful bend, echoed the countless nights she practiced in her cramped childhood bedroom. High above, on a second-floor balcony hidden by shadows, Damien Blackwood stood. He had returned home from a late business meeting, exhausted and slightly on edge. Instead of heading straight to his study, he found himself guided by a faint strain of music drifting through the corridors. Curiosity piqued, he followed the sound until he reached the overlook. To his astonishment, the sight below took his breath away. The maid, he recognized her as one of the newer hires, moved with such graceful beauty that for a moment he forgot he was Damien Blackwood, the billionaire whose very name demanded respect and fear. Everything else in his life dissolved into the background. Elena spun, her arms arching above her head. She was lost in the music, unaware that she was no longer alone. The moonlight glimmered on her dark hair, and her face shone with a serenity that struck Damien in a way he'd never expected. He was known for being cold, for never mixing work with personal sentiment. Yet, here he stood, transfixed by a single dance. When the last note echoed into silence, Elena exhaled, brimming with the thrill of her secret performance. She bowed to her invisible audience and turned off the music. Smiling to herself, she slipped out of the ballroom, softly closing the tall double doors behind her. Damien remained on the balcony, heart beating faster than normal. He wasn't sure if it was curiosity or enchantment, or something else entirely. But he knew one thing, he wanted to see her dance again. Damien strolled through the estate the next morning, his mind abuzz with thoughts of the mysterious dancing maid. Ordinarily, he conducted thorough interviews for his staff, but Elena had been hired while he was overseas on business. He realized he knew almost nothing about her. He passed by the main hall, flanked by the unwavering eyes of portraits of Blackwood ancestors. A wave of restlessness gripped him. Despite a busy schedule, conference calls, contract reviews, important clients, his thoughts drifted back to that vision of Elena dancing in the moonlight. When he reached his private study, he found Theo Bennett, his closest friend and business partner, reviewing documents on a tablet. "You're late," Theo said without looking up. "We have a meeting with the European team in 10 minutes. Damien nodded absently, throwing himself into the leather chair behind his mahogany desk. "Yes, of course," he replied, still lost. Theo noticed his friend's distant tone. With a slight frown, he asked, "Everything okay, Damien? You seem distracted." Damien avoided direct explanation. "Just had a lot on my mind," he mumbled, staring at his computer screen as though it held the secret to his sudden unrest. Theo raised an eyebrow. He had known Damien since their university days and recognized when something was off. But he also knew better than to pry. When Damien wanted to speak, he would. A few hours later, after the day's meetings concluded, Damien found himself pacing near the ballroom. The faint memory of Elena's graceful movements lingered in the air, urging him to wait, to watch once again. But daylight meant the staff followed strict protocols, cleaning one wing at a time. No music, no dancing, just normal work. That evening, he retired to his study, turning over documents but hardly comprehending them. In the corporate world, he was known for shrewd business tactics and a heart of steel. Yet one quiet dance had somehow loosened something in his chest. From time to time, he glanced at the clock, calculating how much longer until the house fell into its usual late-night hush. He told himself this was merely curiosity and interest in a new hire's unusual talent. But deep down, a part of him understood, it was fascination, maybe even a flicker of infatuation, and that terrified him. Several nights passed before Elena finally found an opportunity to dance again. She stepped into the ballroom well past midnight, certain everyone was asleep. Soft piano notes emanated from her tiny speaker, setting the stage for her quiet performance. She twirled across the marble floor, letting the music guide her every movement. Tonight, a swirl of excitement fluttered through her, like she was dancing for an audience she couldn't see. It was a silly thought, she told herself, but it made her heart race. However, as she executed a graceful turn, her foot brushed an antique side table. A priceless porcelain vase, perched precariously on top, teetered. Elena let out a tiny gasp, lunging forward to catch it, but it shattered on the floor. The clatter rang through the cavernous hall like a thunderclap. She froze, blood turning cold. That vase was centuries old, rumored to be part of an exclusive collection from the Ming dynasty. Panicked, Elena knelt, frantically gathering pieces in her trembling hands. Tears pricked at her eyes. She was just a maid, with no resources to pay for something so valuable. She thought of her meager savings and her dream of saving up for formal dance training. It all seemed hopeless now. Hearing footsteps approach, Elena jumped to her feet. It was Mr. Granville, the family butler, his sharp features carved in concern. "Are you all right?" he asked, voice tight. He surveyed the shards. "My word, that vase." "Please, Mr. Granville," Elena whispered, voice quivering. "I'm so sorry. I'll do anything to fix this. I beg you, don't tell Mr. Blackwood." She clasped her hands together, eyes pleading. The butler exhaled heavily, torn between duty and sympathy. "This is serious, Elena. But let me see what I can do," he said, carefully picking up the fragments. Meanwhile, in the shadows behind a marble column, Damien watched. He had arrived moments before, intending to catch another glimpse of her dancing. When he saw the vase fall, his instinct had been to intervene, but a part of him wanted to see how she would handle it. Instead of outrage or denial, she was visibly terrified, remorse etched on every feature. Damien slipped away, silent as a ghost, leaving the butler and a distraught Elena in the broken remains of her dance. He told himself he should be furious, yet a curious gentleness stirred within him. The next day, he would handle this, but not in the way anyone expected. The following morning, Elena woke with a knot in her stomach. She had slept only a few hours, plagued by nightmares of being fired. At dawn, she hurried through her usual tasks, polishing the silver, changing bed linens, and restocking the kitchen pantry. Each time she passed Mr. Granville, he gave her a reassuring nod. But that didn't quell her anxiety. Shortly after noon, she was summoned to the library. The room had an imposing air, dark mahogany shelves lined with leather-bound tomes, thick rugs that muted footsteps, and tall windows that filtered sunlight into narrow beams. There, sitting behind a large desk, was Damien Blackwood himself. Her heart thumped. She lowered her gaze, bracing for the worst. "Mr. Blackwood," she murmured, folding her hands in front of her apron. Damien surveyed her for a moment. Up close, she was even more delicate than he remembered. She had wide, expressive eyes that looked ready to spill tears if he scolded her. He cleared his throat. "I understand you had an accident with a vase last night." Elena's cheeks burned. "Yes, sir. I'm so sorry. I never intended." He held up a hand. "No need to explain. Things break. It happens." He paused, as though weighing his next words. "Have you worked here long, Miss Rivera?" Elena blinked, surprised by his question. "Almost 6 months, sir." Damien nodded, expression unreadable. Consider the vase incident handled. I've spoken to Mr. Granville. You can return to your duties. Utter relief flooded Elena, but confusion lingered. Why wasn't he angry? She had shattered something that was likely worth more than she'd make in a lifetime. She bowed her head again, mumbling a profuse thank you before rushing out of the library. Once the door closed, Damien leaned back in his chair. It was strange how letting her off with a simple warning felt so natural. He was usually a harsh disciplinarian who demanded perfection. But with Elena, a different side of him emerged, protective, curious, maybe even longing. From that day forward, he began to reorder the household schedule, shifting staff rotations, adjusting cleaning times, finding small excuses to wander through the house late at night. It was as though he orchestrated the entire estate to ensure he could see her again, dancing in the ballroom when she thought she was alone. Little did she know that every graceful step she took was watched by a man she barely knew, a man who was fast becoming silently obsessed. Late one evening, as Elena finished tidying up the chandelier in the ballroom, her phone vibrated with a text from Sophie Carter, her best friend and confidant since childhood. Sophie, hey, how's my favorite maid? Still dancing in that big old mansion? Elena smiled softly, typing a quick reply, yes, but I nearly got caught last time. I'm going to be extra careful tonight. She glanced around the room. Even though it was forbidden territory for such frivolity, she couldn't resist. Dancing was as essential to her as breathing. If she didn't move, she felt stagnant and incomplete. Summoning her courage, she connected her phone to a small speaker and let a slow, haunting melody fill the silent chamber. As she began to dance, she sensed a shift in the air, an almost imperceptible presence. The hair on her neck prickled. She turned, startled to see Damien Blackwood standing in the shadows near the far wall, half concealed by a tall marble statue of a Roman goddess. A jolt of fear and embarrassment shot through her. Mr. Blackwood! I'm sorry, Damien didn't move. He looked as though he'd been carved from stone. His usually impassive expression flickered with an emotion Elena couldn't quite place. Please, don't stop, he said quietly, his voice echoing slightly in the cavernous room. It's remarkable. The way you move. Elena swallowed hard. Her heart pounded so loudly she could barely hear the music. For a long moment, neither spoke. She was convinced she was about to lose her job, or at least be reprimanded severely. But Damien simply watched, as though transfixed. The candlelight caught the sharp planes of his face, and in his eyes was a gentle fascination. It was the first time Elena had seen a hint of warmth in him. Unable to bear the scrutiny, she fumbled for her phone, turning off the music. I'm sorry, she repeated, voice shaking. I was just finishing up for the night. I'll leave now. Damien hesitated, words forming behind those intense eyes. But all he managed was a slight nod. He stepped aside to let her pass. As she hurried out, her heart drummed with a mixture of confusion and exhilaration. For the rest of the night, she lay awake, replaying the moment in her mind, Damien's unwavering gaze, the quiet awe in his voice. She didn't know what to make of it, but one thing was clear, her secret was no longer hers alone. A week later, a grand announcement circulated among the staff. Damien Blackwood was hosting a masquerade ball in 2 weeks, a lavish affair that would open the estate to high society guests from all over the country. What shocked everyone was the invitation extended to every member of the household staff. Usually, the help was expected to remain behind the scenes. But this time, they were welcome to attend as guests, provided they found suitable attire and wore masks. Elena, carrying a laundry basket through the corridor, overheard 2 older maids whispering about the news. They looked both thrilled and worried. We've never seen Mr. Blackwood do anything like this, one murmured. He barely tolerates dinner parties, let alone throwing a ball. That night, Elena recounted the news to Sophie over a video call. Sophie's eyes widened. You absolutely must go. This is probably your only chance to mingle, see the glamorous side, maybe even dance in public. Elena twisted a strand of her hair, half excited, half apprehensive. I don't really have a dress or anything fancy. And I'm just a maid, people might look down on me. Sophie waved a dismissive hand at the screen. Borrow a dress, or I'll lend you one. You have to go. Don't let fear hold you back. Elena promised to think about it. Her heart fluttered at the prospect of dancing freely in the same room as wealthy elites. A tiny voice whispered in the back of her mind, will he be watching? When the night of the masquerade arrived, the Blackwood estate sparkled with a grandeur Elena had never seen before. Candles twinkled along the walkways, and the mansion itself glowed from within, the tall windows revealing glimpses of richly dressed guests sipping champagne and conversing in lively tones. Elena stood in her modest bedroom, staring at her reflection in the mirror. She wore a simple but elegant off-white gown that Sophie had tailored for her. Though the fabric was not as luxurious as the designer gowns worn by the elite, it fit her perfectly, accentuating her slender waist and graceful neck. A delicate mask made of lace covered half her face, lending her an air of mystery. Her heart hammered as she walked through the corridors toward the ballroom. The staff who passed her offered smiles of encouragement, some not even recognizing her at first glance. She felt like an intruder in her own workplace, but Sophie's unwavering belief in her gave her courage. The ballroom had been transformed. Gold and crimson drapery decorated the walls, chandeliers glistened, and an orchestra played a lively waltz from a raised platform. Everywhere Elena looked, guests in extravagant masks mingled. The scent of fresh roses and expensive perfume filled the air. She slipped into the crowd, trying to appear invisible, her eyes scanning for any sign of Damien. A wave of self-consciousness washed over her. She knew she didn't belong among these people with their aristocratic bearing and six-figure bank accounts. Suddenly, a deep voice broke through the throng. May I have this dance? Startled, she turned to find Damien Blackwood himself standing there, dressed in a classic black tuxedo and wearing a sleek mask that emphasized his chiseled features. She nearly forgot to breathe. He extended his gloved hand, and Elena hesitated only for a second before placing her trembling hand in his. They took to the floor as the orchestra started a new piece. At first, she was too nervous to do anything but follow his lead, but soon the music swept her away. She forgot about status in class, about the fact that this was her boss. In that moment, he was just a man guiding her gracefully across the floor. As they spun, Damien leaned closer. You dance beautifully, he murmured. Have you been doing this all your life? She tensed, unsure how much to reveal. I've always loved dancing, she said softly. But this is the first time I've ever danced like this. With a partner. The corners of his lips twitched into the faintest smile. You look exquisite tonight. Heat rushed to her cheeks beneath the mask. They danced until the final note lingered in the air and applause erupted around them. Damien slowly let go of her hand. Yet a surge of panic seized Elena. Reality crashed down. She was a maid, not a society belle. She pulled away, fear swirling in her mind. I'm sorry, she whispered, turning to weave through the crowd before he could stop her. Her heart pounded as she dashed out of the ballroom, leaving Damien alone on the dance floor, a question burning in his eyes. Elena hurried through the dimly lit corridors of the estate, her gown swishing around her ankles as she made her escape. The masquerade's music faded behind her, replaced by her own ragged breathing. She found a quiet alcove beneath a grand staircase, where she stopped to catch her breath. Her mind raced with conflicting emotions, excitement from dancing with Damien, shame for crossing a line she feared she shouldn't have, and a raw longing she couldn't understand. She pressed a hand to her racing heart. She heard footsteps echo on the marble floors, and panic shot through her. Peeking around the corner, she saw Mr. Granville escorting a group of guests toward the powder rooms. She exhaled in relief. She needed to find a way back to her quarters without drawing attention. Behind her, a gentle voice spoke, causing her to jump. I've been looking for you. She spun around to see Damien. He had removed his mask, revealing his striking features illuminated by the dim glow of a nearby wall sconce. In that light, he looked uncharacteristically tender, as if a protective facade had fallen away. "Elena," he began, eyes flickering. "Why did you run? Did I do something to frighten you?" She swallowed, stepping back. I just don't belong here. This life, these people, this dance. It's not for me." Damien shook his head, his voice warm. "Is that what you truly think?" A flurry of emotions coursed through her, making her head spin. In the distance, the clock in the main tower chimed midnight. She cast her eyes downward. "I'm sorry," she repeated, not knowing what else to say. Then, before he could detain her further, she slipped away into the warren of hallways, heart thudding like a drumbeat. Damien stood there, frustration and intrigue warring within him. People seldom ran from him, they usually sought his favor. Elena's reluctance only deepened the hold she had on his thoughts. In the days following the masquerade, Olivia Blackwood, Damien's formidable mother, arrived at the estate. She was known for her sharp wit and sharper tongue, as well as her firm belief that the wealthy should remain among their own kind. Rumors hinted that she had come to evaluate the success of her son's grand event and to ensure he was still on track to expand the Blackwood empire. Elena did her best to avoid Olivia's gaze whenever she served tea or arranged flowers in the main parlor. Rumors circulated among the staff that Olivia had been making pointed inquiries: "Who is that girl in the off-white dress dancing with my son?" or surely she wasn't among his usual social circle. The staff remained tight-lipped, but Elena sensed the disapproval simmering beneath the elegant woman's veneer. One afternoon, Olivia cornered Damien in the study. She wore a tailored navy suit that only highlighted her regal bearing. "Darling, we need to talk about that ball," she began, her voice deceptively sweet. "I noticed you spent quite a bit of time dancing with someone unexpected." Damien fixed her with a cool stare. "I invited the staff to join. It was for everyone's enjoyment." Olivia's lips pressed into a thin line. "Very charitable of you," she said. "But I won't have you entangling yourself with a maid. It's unseemly and complicated." A flash of anger sparked in Damien's eyes. "Mother, I have no interest in discussing this right now." Olivia merely raised an eyebrow. "You forget your obligations, Damien. You are a Blackwood. Our family's name and empire rest on your shoulders. Don't throw it all away on a mere distraction." The tension in the room thickened, the air nearly crackling. Finally, Olivia turned on her heel and left. Damien found himself gripping the edge of his desk, knuckles white. His mother's words played over and over in his mind, fueling a war within him, duty versus an inexplicable yearning for something more. Word of Olivia's disapproval spread through the mansion in hushed whispers. Even if Elena tried to deny it to herself, she could feel the eyes of the household upon her, as though everyone suspected something was amiss. Late one evening, she confided in Sophie via text. "Elena, I'm not sure how much longer I can stay here. The tension is unbearable. I've saved some money, maybe it's time to go." "Sophie, but what about your dream? That estate is huge, there might be more opportunities. You could keep dancing, practicing." Elena hesitated before replying. "I can't dance freely anymore. Too many eyes. Olivia Blackwood is watching me like a hawk. She hates the idea of her son being around someone like me." There was a pause. Then Sophie's reply came, laced with determination. "If you really feel you have to leave, then do it for yourself, not because you're running away. But don't give up on dancing. If you quit, do it to chase your dream of becoming a real dancer." Elena locked her phone and stared at the ornate wallpaper in her modest bedroom. Sophie was right. She didn't want to spend her life as a maid, living in fear. She wanted to dance on real stages, perform for audiences who chose to watch her. And she definitely didn't want to tiptoe around a forbidden infatuation with Damien Blackwood. By the time morning light seeped through her window, Elena had made her decision. She would pack her things, leave a polite resignation letter on Mr. Granville's desk, and slip away before sunrise the next day. She felt a pang of regret. She would miss the household staff, the majestic ballroom, and the stolen moments of midnight dances. Most of all, she felt an ache at leaving behind the man who had watched her dance from the shadows. But she convinced herself it was better this way. In their worlds, a future together was impossible. On the evening Elena intended to leave, she tiptoed downstairs with a small suitcase in hand, heart thudding in her chest. The estate was quiet, save for the distant hum of security cameras and the rustle of night breezes through the gardens. She aimed for the side exit used by staff for discreet entrances and exits. Just as her hand touched the doorknob, a voice cut through the silence. "Going somewhere?" She froze. Turning slowly, she saw Damien emerging from the shadows of the corridor. He wore a simple shirt and trousers, clearly not in his usual formal attire. His hair was slightly disheveled, and in the dim lighting, his eyes looked haunted. "Mr. Blackwood," she breathed, panicking. It's my day off tomorrow. I'm just going." He arched an eyebrow. "With all your belongings?" Elena's chest tightened. She had hoped to avoid this confrontation. The tension between them weighed heavily in the night air. I'm leaving. Resigning." She looked down. "I have other dreams I need to follow." Damien took a step closer, his voice low and urgent. "I can't stop thinking about you, Elena. Don't go. At least, not yet." Tears pricked her eyes. "This is impossible. You know that, right? Your mother hates me. The staff gossips. You're destined for bigger things, someone on your level." He reached out, gently tilting her chin up so she had to meet his gaze. "I've spent my life surrounded by cold negotiations, corporate takeovers, and people who never see the real me. Until you. When I watch you dance, everything else fades away. I want to know you. The real you, not just the maid who tidies my rooms." She swallowed hard, tears threatening to fall. "I don't want to be your secret." A brief flicker of pain crossed his face. "I'm not asking you to be. But I'm not sure I know how to do this openly." Elena closed her eyes, heart pounding with a conflict of emotions. "I can't stay here like this. Not if I'm just hiding in corners, dancing for you in the dark." Damien bowed his head in defeat. "I understand." They stood in silence for a long moment, the weight of unspoken emotions pressing down. Then Elena stepped forward, brushing her lips softly against his cheek, a silent farewell, and turned to leave the only place she had ever danced so freely. Fate, however, had a different plan. As Elena made her way through the gardens, the skies opened up with a sudden downpour. She clutched her suitcase and dashed for cover under a stone archway. Rain drenched her hair and dress, and the chill seeped into her bones. To her shock, Damien appeared minutes later, an umbrella in hand, coat flapping in the wind. He must have followed her. Water dripped down his face, and he looked almost as soaked as she was. Without a word, he stepped beneath the archway and held the umbrella over her head. The closeness of his presence, the heat emanating from him despite the cold rain, made her heart stutter. She opened her mouth to speak, but words failed her. The storm raged around them, lightning flashing in the distance. Damien's voice was raspy. "You shouldn't be out here like this. At least wait until the storm calms." Her eyes flicked to his. "Why are you here?" He took a labored breath. "Because when I saw you leaving, all I could think was how much I'd miss you. And that terrified me more than anything else." Elena trembled, from both the cold and the torrent of emotion swirling inside her. Without warning, Damien leaned in, pressing his lips to hers, a gentle kiss that erupted into a swell of warmth between them. In that instant, the rain ceased to matter, the estate walls no longer existed, and social barriers dissolved. They broke apart, breathless. Elena stared at him, tears mingling with raindrops on her cheeks. It was a stolen moment of pure tenderness, one that shifted the foundation of her decision to leave. By morning, rumors of Elena and Damien's closeness swept through the household. A maid had seen them returning from the garden, soaked, but hand in hand. Whispers traveled rapidly, eventually reaching Olivia Blackwood's ears. She confronted Damien in the drawing room, voice taut with anger. "What is this I hear about you parading around with that maid in the middle of the night? Have you lost your mind?" Damien stood tall, refusing to cower. "I'm an adult, capable of making my own choices." Olivia scoffed, eyes blazing. "Your choices will destroy everything your father and I built. The Blackwood name stands for prestige and power. You are playing with fire, Damien." He tensed, fists clenching at his sides. "Elena has nothing to do with my business decisions. My personal life is mine alone." Unmoved, Olivia lashed out, "If you insist on entangling yourself with someone so beneath you, I'll make sure she regrets ever stepping into this house." Fear flared in Damien's chest, but he masked it with stoic defiance. "You will do no such thing. I won't allow you to harm her." Olivia's lips curled. "This is your final warning, end this infatuation, or I'll do it for you." She stormed out, leaving Damien torn between fighting for Elena and preserving the empire he had dedicated his life to. Deep down, he recognized that if forced to choose, he would do anything to keep Elena safe, even if it meant breaking her heart. Later that evening, Damien summoned Elena to a secluded corner of the vast rose garden. Lanterns lit the winding paths, casting gentle light across the vibrant blooms. She arrived, her stomach fluttering with both hope and dread. He faced her with a rigid stance, lines of tension bracketing his mouth. "Elena," he said quietly, struggling for composure, "I think it's best you leave. Tonight." Her eyes widened, a mixture of heartbreak and confusion flooding her. "What? After everything that happened, last night?" Damien stared off into the distance, jaw clenched. "Last night was a mistake. I was caught up in the moment. My mother is right, you don't belong in my world, and I can't risk everything for a passing fancy." Tears spilled onto Elena's cheeks. She could feel a hollow ache expanding in her chest, almost choking her. "You said you couldn't stop thinking about me. That you..." "Forget what I said." His voice was ice-cold, eyes devoid of the warmth she had come to cherish. "I have responsibilities, and you're just a maid." A sob escaped her throat. Without waiting for further explanation, she spun on her heel and ran, tears blurring her vision. Damien remained behind, every muscle trembling with repressed agony. In truth, he had never felt more alive than when he was with her. But he was convinced this was the only way to protect her from Olivia's wrath. In the days and weeks that followed, Elena found a small apartment in a bustling part of town. She took on work at a local cafe, saving every penny she could. Despite her heartbreak, she refused to let misery consume her. She channeled her pain into dance, practicing in a cramped studio she rented by the hour. Each graceful movement was a reminder of the life she dreamed of, far from the Blackwood estate and its tangled complexities. Meanwhile, Damien threw himself into work with renewed ferocity. Theo watched, concerned, as Damien spent late nights poring over financial statements, deal proposals, and global expansions. He rarely slept, and when he did, nightmares haunted him. His once confident demeanor now had a brittle edge. One afternoon, Theo cornered him in the executive lounge. "Damien, what's going on? You're snapping at everyone, and you look like you haven't seen a bed in days." Damien rubbed his temples. "I'm fine," he lied. "Just busy." Theo frowned. "Does this have anything to do with Elena?" At her name, Damien's composure slipped. His eyes closed momentarily. I don't want to talk about it. Theo sighed heavily, placing a hand on Damien's shoulder. If you need to fix something, fix it. The empire won't collapse if you follow your heart for once. Damien shrugged away, turning cold again. Leave it alone, Theo. But the hollowness inside him wouldn't fade. He felt like he'd sacrificed the one radiant thing in his life for the sake of duty. And the price was a loneliness he never knew could cut this deep. Months slipped by. Elena continued to audition for dance troupes and local showcases. Eventually, she stumbled upon a prestigious dance competition that offered scholarship opportunities and the chance to perform before prominent choreographers. With Sophie's encouragement, she auditioned. Word spread quickly about her raw talent. A video of her audition performance was uploaded to social media by a fellow dancer. Within a week, it garnered thousands of views, then hundreds of thousands, comments flooding in about her emotional, powerful routine. Although she was thrilled by the sudden online acclaim, Elena still carried a heavy heart. The memory of Damien remained lodged in her mind, especially whenever she danced in an empty studio under low lights. Yet, seeing the supportive messages from strangers about her dancing fueled her determination. She started to believe she could build a new life, one where her dreams weren't tied to forbidden romance or overshadowed by fear. Back at the Blackwood Tower, Damien was in his office reviewing a flurry of emails when Theo strolled in. Without a word, Theo placed a tablet on Damien's desk and hit play. A video of Elena's audition lit up the screen. Damien's eyes widened the moment he recognized her. There she was, wearing a simple leotard and dancing across a bare stage with breathtaking grace. Every movement was filled with passion and conviction. He watched, heart-pounding, as the online audience praised her skill and artistry. A wave of longing and regret washed over him. How had he allowed himself to push her away? She was far more than just a maid, she was an artist who glowed with inherent brilliance. Where did you find this? Damien asked, voice hoarse. Theo shrugged. It's all over social media. People are calling her the next rising star in contemporary ballet. Damien rewatched the video, unable to tear his eyes away. As she finished her final move, she looked directly into the camera, tears shining in her eyes. Something inside him cracked open. He knew he had made the biggest mistake of his life by letting her go. On the night of the competition finals, the theater buzzed with excitement. Elena stood backstage, nerves twisted in her stomach. She peeked around the curtain to see the packed auditorium. This was her moment to prove herself, to step out of the shadows once and for all. Meanwhile, unbeknownst to her, Damien slipped into a seat in the back row, cap pulled low over his eyes in an attempt to remain anonymous. He had arrived just minutes before, heart thudding in his chest. All he wanted was to witness her triumph. When Elena finally stepped on stage, the lights dimmed, and a hush fell over the crowd. The music began, a haunting melody that seemed to echo every piece of her soul. Her movements were pure poetry, a testament to both her discipline and her heartache. Damien watched, transfixed. Each step, each turn, reminded him of the magic he had seen all those nights ago in his ballroom. Except now, the world was seeing it too. As the final note faded, applause thundered through the theater. Elena stood under the spotlight, chest heaving, tears streaming down her face. In a surge of adrenaline, Damien left his seat and walked down the aisle, straight toward the stage. The crowd murmured in confusion as he climbed the steps. Elena's eyes widened in disbelief. She stood frozen, still breathing heavily from her performance. Damien took a deep breath, voice echoing through the hushed auditorium. I was a fool to let you go, he said, his tone unsteady but resolute. You were never just a maid. You are a brilliant dancer, and he swallowed, eyes shining with raw emotion. I love you, Elena. Elena pressed a trembling hand to her mouth, tears flowing freely. She stepped toward him, forgetting the audience, forgetting everything but the man who had broken her heart and was now here, laying his own heart bare. In the roaring applause that followed, Damien turned to see Olivia Blackwood appearing at the edge of the stage, escorted by Theo. She looked outraged, her sharp features set in disapproval. But the audience's reaction, the cameras flashing, and the world's eyes upon them left her with limited choices. She raised her voice, trying to be heard over the crowd. "Damien, this is hardly the place to..." He cut her off gently yet firmly. "Mother, I won't hide how I feel anymore. If you want to disown me, ruin me financially, do whatever you must. But I won't turn my back on Elena again." Olivia glared, torn between fury and the public spectacle. However, the cameras pointed in her direction and the hush of the crowd made a scene almost impossible. With a tight expression, she turned and exited without another word. Theo, standing in the wings, cheered. The rest of the audience rose in a standing ovation, not entirely sure of the drama unfolding but moved by the sincerity of Damien's confession. Elena stepped forward, tears sparkling on her cheeks. She took Damien's hand, allowing him to gently pull her into his arms. In that moment, they chose love over fear, defying everything that had once kept them apart. Years later, Elena stood in a grand theater filled to capacity. Gone were the days of secret midnight dances in a hidden ballroom. Now, she was a renowned dancer with her own touring company, performing across continents. Critics lauded her as a once-in-a-generation talent. Backstage, she adjusted her costume for the evening's performance. Damien entered, holding a bouquet of her favorite flowers. He wore a tailored suit, but his face held the same awe he'd shown when he first glimpsed her dancing in the moonlight. "Nervous?" he teased softly. She smiled, shaking her head. "Not with you here." Their life together hadn't been without struggles. Olivia's influence waned once the public embraced Elena's gift. Investors, enthralled by Damien's unwavering stance and Elena's undeniable talent, rallied behind the couple. Damien had expanded the Blackwood empire ethically, focusing on philanthropic endeavors in the arts. Part of that included funding dance scholarships for underprivileged youth, so no aspiring dancer would face the barriers Elena once did. When Elena stepped on stage that night, the audience erupted into applause, anticipating a breathtaking performance. She let the music guide her, each movement a testament to her journey, from a timid maid dancing alone in a grand estate to a world-famous artist whose story inspired countless others. In the front row, Damien watched with quiet pride and immeasurable love. Their eyes met under the spotlight, a silent acknowledgement of how far they had come. She was no longer just the maid, and he was no longer the untouchable billionaire locked in a tower of his own making. They were partners in life and in love, bound by a dance that would last forever. As the final notes soared, Elena took her bow, and the crowd thundered its approval. In that moment, she felt the fullness of her dreams realized, and at the edge of the stage, Damien smiled back at her, the man who once watched from the shadows, now standing boldly by her side. Together, they had transformed a forbidden love into a story that resonated across social media, across the city, and across countless hearts around the world. And with every performance, Elena reminded everyone who watched that magic can blossom in the most unexpected places, if only one dares to dance in the moonlight and let love find its way. The end.